USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from US College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. An in-depth look at this week's top college hockey matchup and a preview of the other big games.
Welcome to USCHO's Game of the Week podcast for Thursday, January 20th, 2022. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. This podcast is brought to you by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Membership required. Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Well, a game that really stands out on the schedule this week for a number of reasons has number 3 Michigan traveling to number 11 Minnesota.
And joining us now on the Game of the Week podcast to preview this weekend's series between Minnesota and Michigan. He covers the Gophers for the Rink Live, well-known scribe in this game, Jess Myers. Jess, welcome into the show. We get a big weekend of hockey in front of us, don't we?
It's Hockey Day Minnesota on Saturday here in the state of hockey, as they like to call themselves. And a big week and a big series, obviously. Kind of the two alpha dogs in the Big Ten right now, although Ohio State and Notre Dame might have something to say about that before all is said and done. But Minnesota was picked to win the Big Ten. Michigan right at their heels with all of that individual talent that the Wolverines have amassed. So, yeah, obviously a big series. Right?
Well, let's get into some of the Gophers topics of late. They have had a number of them, including the departure of Jack LaFontaine.
We've got plenty of topics.
We have plenty of topics. The departure of Jack LaFontaine, obviously that's something they probably want in their rearview mirror now. But what is the situation like in that locker room right now in terms of, finding faith in a new goaltender that never played, really in the last 2 seasons?
The most interesting thing to come out of that locker room in the last week and a half or so is the fact that someone, we don't know who, and it wasn't the coach, but someone wrote on the whiteboard in the Gophers locker room, we have everything we need. This idea that, yes, we were picked to win the Big Ten with Jack LaFontaine and with a healthy team. And even without Jack LaFontaine and with all of the injuries and COVID and everything else everybody has dealt with, this idea that the Gophers have everything they need in that locker room right now and are ready to go. With all of that said, it was a traumatic week last week in a lot of ways. Number one, you find out that 2 pretty good players, Rhett Pitlick, a freshman forward, and Jackson Nelson, junior forward, are both going to be lost for a month or more. Had COVID make its way through the locker room. Brock Faber didn't play either game last weekend. He's one of their top defensemen, and he's going to be on the Olympic team. Now they don't officially say it's COVID, but you can put 2 and 2 together pretty easily. And there was probably a positive test there. For Sunday, after you sweep Michigan State, after you move it off your back, this team that had split 5 consecutive series, they finally get a sweep. Everything seems to be going well, and lo and behold, the Carolina Hurricanes call, and they're going to sign your top big net in Carolina. So all of that added up, they get a split with Alaska last weekend, and Bob Motzko's not a guy who's unaware of how the PairWise works. I mean, that was a costly loss to an Alaska team that going into that game had only won 5 games. That knocked them down a couple pegs in the PairWise, and now they have some work to do.
When you look at last weekend's series against Alaska, it felt like there was a rally, for a new goaltender on the first night, and they get a nice 4-1 win, but then the back end, a 3-2 loss. Could you feel that there's anything different in this team besides just the fact that there's a new player between the pipes?
This is interesting when you look at Justin Close and what he's been on this team for the past 3 years. He's played in parts of 6 games over the course of 3 years. And he knew his role. I mean, I talked to him over the summer after Jared Moe, who previously was their backup, decided to transfer. He went up going to Wisconsin, and he's playing a few games for the Badgers, and he's doing well there. I talked to Jared Moe, and I said, with the transfer portal and things like that, I talked to Justin Close, and I said, with the transfer portal, it's easier to move around. You could feasibly go to a program where you get some more playing time. He wasn't interested in that at all. He's a kid who was studying business. He wanted to get his education. He kind of knew his role on this team. And keep in mind, this guy wasn't some, guy that they found off the street that just happened to have a goalie bag. I mean, he played in the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League for 2 seasons. He was the most valuable goalie his first season there. He was the most valuable player in the entire league his second season there. So he stopped a puck or two in his day. And you talk to the Gophers, and there seems to be this idea of rallying around him. He's one of those teammates that has come to the rink every day with a smile on his face, never complained, never been in the coach's office saying, hey, when am I going to get a start? Anything like that. He's kind of been thrust into this role now, and there seems to be a sense that he's our guy, and we're going to make the best of the situation.
You and I, Jess, were on a call last night with Mel Pearson, and we'll probably have some audio from that later in this episode. But I look at what the lineup looks like for the Olympic team, and obviously Michigan's going to be missing some players, and Mel was pretty honest saying that there's some time for desperation. Matt Nyes, Ben Myers, Brock Faber all will head to China to play in the Olympics for Team USA from the Gophers. Do you feel like there is probably a sense of urgency in their locker room as well, knowing that, a couple of weeks from now, just going to be missing this goaltender that we've talked about, but you're not going to be missing three of your best players as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And when Michigan comes to town, it's a big series, no matter what the standings say. But the fact that, as I mentioned, these are the two, teams that everybody's been looking at the Big Ten. This is a series where you have all of your players, at least for now. Now, keep in mind, last year, the Gophers went out to Yost Ice Arena. They swept Michigan out there. But that was a series where both teams were missing key players to World Juniors. And there was this sense that you didn't get a real idea of what the Gophers, what the Wolverines looked like a year ago. This year, kind of no excuses. Both teams are dealing with some injuries. Both teams have dealt with COVID, but this is as close to a full lineup on both teams that you're going to see. So this series, and then a couple after that, Michigan State and Notre Dame are the next two beyond that for the Gophers. There's a sense that, you've got to get 6-point weekends here if you want to stay in the hunt for the Big Ten title, which of course is the most straightforward way to get yourself into the NCAA tournament.
Jess, up top, you mentioned Ohio State and Notre Dame as teams that are going to be in the hunt for the top of the league. You've got that series with Minnesota at Ohio State. Michigan's going to take on Ohio State. How much of an opportunity is this for Ohio State and Notre Dame to maybe establish a position in the league for the playoffs with these other two teams a little bit depleted?
Well, you look at the Gophers schedule and, immediately you circle those three series that they're going to have the Olympic guys gone. It's going to be a home series with Michigan State, which, they just won a couple of games from out in East Lansing just a couple of weeks ago. Michigan State is a team that you can never sleep on just because their goaltending is so good. Drew DeRitter, despite the fact that he doesn't get a lot of offensive support, has just been amazing for the Spartans this season. And we've gotten used to that for the last couple of seasons. Notre Dame the same way. I mean, my joke is the Irish do scoring by committee, and the committee doesn't meet very often, but they have a system that works for them with two good goalies this year and that defensive system, and they're getting some goal scoring as well. So the Irish are always dangerous. And, Bob Motzko likes to joke that it's a 1-goal game every time they play the Gophers. You just don't know who's going to have 3 and who's going to have 2, that kind of thing. But the two big series I'm looking at are a trip to Penn State and a trip to Ohio State that the Gophers are going to have to make in February without those 3 Olympic guys. And those are obviously going to be some key points. They generally play well in Columbus. They haven't played as well in State College. I don't know if it's the length of the trip or the fact that Pagula Ice Arena can be such an intimidating atmosphere. But those are the series you really have to wonder about. And if there are points to be had there, if they can grab some points with a lineup that's going to be depleted. Now, to Bob Motzko's credit, even before the 3 guys were named to the Olympics, he made it clear that, hey, my roster's open. I told USA Hockey, take whoever you need. I don't know if that's a patriotic streak on his part or the fact that, he's won a gold medal as a World Juniors coach, and he knows the importance of playing for your country. But you're not hearing any grumbling from people. I'm sure behind closed doors, there's some concern about taking those 3 guys out of the lineup. I'm sure behind closed doors, there's some concern about Jack LaFontaine and his decision. But, Bob Motzko's been one who has said, hey, we wish Jack the best. And 20 minutes later, I was over it. We move on. It's just like a player getting a season-ending injury. You just way to deal with it.
And there is that lineage. I'm sure Bob heard the stories from Herb Brooks along the way about the Olympics. I'm sure that the importance of that's got to be high in his mind.
And one thing he said that kind of struck me last week, and the Motzko family is dealing with something nobody should ever have to deal with here in the loss of their son who passed away tragically in a car accident over the summer. But the one thing he brought up last week when reporters asked about, hey, how tough is it going to be to lose these three guys? He said, imagine if it was your son, if he came to you and said, Dad, I have a chance to play on the Olympic team. Would you ever imagine saying no to them? No, of course you would. So this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for these guys. Let's face it. It's a feather in the cap for the Gopher program that there are three guys that USA Hockey deems to say, hey, we want you on our team. Now, the thing that's going to be really tough on the ice is the line of Ben Myers, Matthew Nyes, and Chaz Lucius has been just absolutely on fire. Even in the loss to Alaska, I mean, these guys were in the offensive zone. It seemed like the entire third period. One of them, Nyes wears 89, Myers wears 39, and Lucius wears 29. So we've nicknamed them the Niners. That's the top line for the Gophers now, and they're a lot of fun to watch. So taking 2/3 of that line away is going to be a big loss offensively for them.
Yes. Why don't we handicap this series against Michigan? And, with all of these great players on both sides in there, and this game obviously on home ice for the Gophers, does that maybe sway if you had to maybe handicap this one? And as a gambler, would you think that the Gophers have some sort of an edge here being on home ice, or does that matter?
You would think so, but Michigan has come into 3M Arena at Mariucci and played really well like the last 3 years. And they've done it in different ways. Sometimes it's been with offense. Sometimes it was Strauss-Mann in goal, just kind of shutting the Gophers down. Mel Pearson, to his credit, he's the one coach that consistently talks about the big Olympic-size ice sheet at 3M Arena at Mariucci, that extra 15 feet width on the blue line. And he says the one thing you have to be really careful is you can drift a long way from the net if you're playing defense, if you're in the defensive zone. It's hard. It's hard to keep in mind where the net is, and suddenly you can leave your goalie exposed. So that's one thing they're really cognizant of. I just think this is such an even matchup. And watching them play a month ago at Yost Ice Arena, and they were 6-1, 6-1 games, and one was 6-1 one way, one was 6-1 the other way. And interestingly enough, in that second game, Jack LaFontaine got pulled. So Justin Close actually played a period or so against Michigan. So he actually has some experience against the Wolverines. That might be a little advantage for the Gophers this weekend as well. But I just think with how evenly matched these teams are, this one has a split written all over it to me.
Well, these sports books, I just pulled it up. Sports books have Michigan as a minus 160 favorite, at least on Friday night. You can get the Gophers at a price of plus 130 on DraftKings right now. Jess Myers, always good catching up with you. You can catch everything he writes and all of his great colleagues at the Rink Live at therinklive.com. Read the stuff. It is some of the best college hockey coverage in the country.
Thanks, Jim. And thanks, Ed. Always great to talk to you both. Hey, I just booked my flights to Boston, so I'll see you out east in April.
That's Jess Myers from the Rink Live, therinklive.com. More of the Game of the Week podcast coming up. It's brought to you by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org.
This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Know how people say life happens? Well, for me, life was happening, and I needed a new truck. I didn't have time to shop around for a good loan, so I got one from the dealer, higher interest and all. Month after month, those payments were squeezing me. So I went to DCU. They refinanced my loan and helped lower my rate, which lowered my payments. These days, I have more money in my pocket for whatever life throws at me. What will DCU mean to you? Insured by NCUA. Membership required. Visit dcu.org.
Welcome back to the Game of the Week podcast for January 20th, 2022. I'm Ed Trefzger with Jim Connelly. Jim, it was good talking to Jess and getting the lay of the land and how convoluted and chaotic things have been for the last couple of weeks for the Gophers and how they're going to be heading into the Olympics. But you also had a chance earlier in the week to talk to Mel Pearson, and he's got some interesting outlooks on what's coming up too.
I don't think this is something that most coaches go through, the potential to lose players to an Olympic year. But when you are in this position, does that put more urgency on games that you're going to have a full lineup like you have this weekend?
Good question, Jim. And thanks for the question. I think it does. I mean, there's a little more sense of urgency, and especially given this weekend's games with Minnesota. They're picked to finish first in the Big Ten, and we had a great series with them earlier in the year. So I definitely think there's some urgency regardless because we are playing them. And then, knowing we're both missing players, I think it puts, again, a little bit more importance on this weekend and trying to get as many points as we can. So, no doubt about it. And, hopefully we have everybody ready to go and they do too.
Hey, Mel, the last 2 weekends, do you feel like your players have played, I don't want to say a chip on their shoulder or even maybe their own sense of urgency, knowing the situation in back of them, knowing the situation in front of them, that they maybe are, it seems that you've played some of your better hockey over the last 2 weekends of the season. Do you feel it in the locker room that there's something different?
Yeah, you sense it. You sense it definitely against UMass. I mean, when we played Duluth and Minnesota State earlier in the year, I don't want to say there's something to prove. Maybe Duluth, because we were scheduled to play them. We had 25 healthy bodies, and we were told we can't play, and we're supposed to play Duluth. So I think, we wanted to, and Duluth had most of their team back. So it was, a good situation for us to get the opportunity to play them early. And then I think same with UMass. UMass is defending national champion. I think our guys said, hey, we felt we had a type of team last year that, could have won it. And now they're a different team. We're a little bit different team, but still, I think our guys were really dialed in and we're really looking forward to that series and that opportunity. Similar we were to the icebreaker early in the year.
So, Jim, we've heard from a reporter covering the Gophers. We've heard from the head coach of the Wolverines. This weekend means a lot, particularly because both teams are going to lose players for the Olympics. I saw today the teams will probably have everybody for the weekend of the 28th, 29th, and 30th, depending on how the games come out. But then that's 2 or maybe 3 weeks in February that they're without players as they're heading down the stretch. So a couple of wins on a weekend, a sweep for either one of these teams is huge. There's got to be a lot of desperation and urgency in this weekend for both teams.
Yeah, and I actually kind of appreciated the candor from Mel Pearson. A lot of coaches would sidestep a question and say, we have the bodies in the locker room. We believe we're a good team no matter what. But he was pretty honest in saying that there is a real sense of urgency for this weekend, next weekend. Just the reality of finding bodies that can be competitive and making sure your team is the best team it can be on the ice. And, the reality is that once you get back to the tournament, Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament, you're basically back to full personnel, assuming that there's no COVID issues that arise when you're in China for the Olympics, travel issues that can come up. I know that the U.S. is going to come back a couple of days later than Canada because that's the time that their charter's coming back. It's kind of crazy to lose players in the middle of the season the way that teams will for this Olympic cycle. Back in the 80s and into the 90s when, colleges lost players, they knew that these guys were gone. A, they knew they were gone in September. And then B, they knew they were gone from pretty much January through March. And you had a timeline, you knew exactly what to expect. This is a little bit more unexpected, and it's definitely a little bit more less itinerized. These guys are kind of flying off the seat of their pants more so than you'd expect. So it's a lot of things that are, a lot of tennis balls in the air for these coaches to have to kind of manage. And the desperation right now feels like it's really there for any team that's losing players to the Olympics.
Minnesota still has the question in net, although it seems like that's getting answered. Meanwhile, Michigan has tended to play better on the road than they have at Yost this season. So, this one's a hard one to figure out. I think my pick when I submitted them for USCHO Bettor's Edge is that I'm picking Michigan in this one, but I could be convinced either way. It's going to be a compelling thing. But what really gets me out of this weekend is something we talked about with Jess, and that's that Ohio State and Notre Dame have a pretty good opportunity over these weeks. And maybe they get a leg up. And when it comes Big Ten tournament time, maybe Michigan or Minnesota find themselves on the road and not at home. Or maybe one of them fails to be the top seed and doesn't get to host the final round of things. So it could be very big when it comes to the postseason.
Yeah, you never know. This next month, the whole month of February, will kind of reshuffle the entire Big Ten. What an opportunity for Notre Dame. What an opportunity for Ohio State to make up some ground. These two teams really are running neck and neck with Minnesota and Michigan. So I do think you're right that there will be some opportunity to maybe get a 6-point weekend out there. If you can, and especially if you can do it head to head, because we know these teams will play head to head. If you can play in Minnesota or in Michigan and take 6 points out of a weekend while those teams are a little bit down, boy, what an opportunity in the standings.
Well, the next game on our list is actually something that if I had to pick one from the list to go and see, it might be this one. A huge rivalry, Michigan Tech, ranked number 17 at number 18, Northern Michigan, a big Upper Peninsula rivalry. Both have had some big games this season. Maybe now the sweep over Wisconsin that Michigan Tech had early in the year doesn't look as big, but they tied Michigan in the one game Michigan played in the GLI. Northern Michigan coming off a split with Minnesota State, vying for points in the CCHA. Michigan Tech right now with an 8-point lead over NMU. This is going to be just epic, I think.
Always is when these two teams play, but then you have to look at the fact that for Michigan Tech, they're on the inside of the bubble right now for the NCAA tournament, sitting at 11. And if you can take 2 wins off a Northern Michigan team that has had some quality wins themselves, boy, does that boost up your PairWise, boost up your RPI. Same goes, though, for Northern. And they, probably felt good about themselves last Friday night, earning a win against Minnesota State. But that ends up being a split at the end of the day. You don't get as much for it. And, they're trying to find a way to make their case for the NCAA tournament. Right now, Northern Michigan still in contention at 26 in the PairWise and 13-9-1. That's a pretty good record, but you're going to have to start putting together the wins. And, in terms of teams that are in front of you, there's only a few in their conference, and it's going to be a lot of conference play moving forward. You have Bemidji State is in front of you right now. You have Michigan Tech and you have Minnesota State left. So if you're not playing one of those teams, you're probably not making a lot of headway. This is a weekend that if you're Northern, you can make some headway in the PairWise, move yourself much closer to the bubble.
Well, on to the next game. And, not just college hockey, but hockey fans in general, and especially where I live in Western New York, just keep talking about Devin Levi. He got another shutout, his 9th of the season, when the Huskies visited Vermont and beat UVM 4-0 on Tuesday. His numbers are crazy. This is a great weekend, home and home, Northeastern and UMass. The Huskies travel out to Western Massachusetts on Friday. Meanwhile, UMass is playing great this season, too. This is going to be epic as well.
Heavyweight. This is the series that I think a lot of people in hockey East have been waiting for. Listen, neither one of these teams are in first place right now. UMass a lot closer, and they have some games in hand on UMass Lowell that's sitting in first place. But I look at this series this weekend. Wow. I mean, this is one that you had circled on your calendar because of the fact that both of these teams have played well at times this year. Devin Levi, he has been a great story. Technically a sophomore, but really a freshman, didn't play a single game last year for Northeastern because of both the World Junior Tournament and then injuries after that. But his numbers are unreal. UMass, have lost very few games in regulation. Michigan, they did get swept by Michigan a couple of weekends ago, and that's probably, fresh in their brain, and they're trying to get their ship headed back in the right direction. What an opportunity then to play a team like Northeastern that has gotten good goaltending. They get some really good speed up the middle. This is a Northeastern team that maybe not a lot of people circled on their calendars. Not a lot of people saw in the standings and the preseason polls as being a team to contend. This is a really good Northeastern team.
This next matchup in the NCHC is very important for both teams. Number 9, North Dakota at number 4, Western Michigan. Both teams have missed some games. North Dakota didn't get to play last weekend. The series at Omaha was postponed. So they have been sitting on and simmering on a sweep at home at the hands of Cornell on the 7th and 8th of January, you know that they're going to be ready. Meanwhile, Western Michigan, you want to talk about sitting around and waiting. They last played on December 29th, beating Michigan State at East Lansing at Munn, and they were supposed to be at Yost to take on Michigan in that infamous canceled game on December 30th. Then last weekend at Colorado College was postponed for Western Michigan. So this is going to be 23 days or something like that since they've played. The Broncos at number 4. This would be a huge statement weekend for them. We can use any of the words. This one's a heavyweight too, and some heavyweight battles. I mean, even heavier than Northeastern and UMass. These are literally heavy teams.
They really are. And I don't want to take anything away from Northeastern and UMass because I think they have a little bit more speed. These guys are more heavy. But at the same time, they're going to both have to shake off a little bit of rust. You did have weekends off in there, a little bit more extended for Western than North Dakota. Maybe North Dakota should be very hungry after that sweep at the hands of Cornell. I'd be interested to see if they wear their black jerseys this week. I think they call them their business suits. When they really need a win, they seem to put those jerseys on. I don't know if they'll don those this week, but I really look at this as huge. You know, for Western, they're doing really well. They're in a really good pairwise spot. For North Dakota, though, you know, you've dropped a little bit over the weeks. And now if you were to lose 2 more, even to a good team with a strong RPI like Western Michigan, you get swept this weekend, you might find yourself down to 14, 15 in the pairwise. Bubblicious, not a place you want to be heading into the month of February. This is a North Dakota team that is almost desperate for wins right now. And to beat a very quality opponent would give you a big boost in your pairwise, big boost in the RPI. That's exactly what they need. I think there's a lot of NCAA implications in this series. You know, just like that Northeastern UMass series, where I think it's very similar. These two teams, I think, had expectations of making sure they're in. In either one of them, you go either side, you get swept or you sweep. There's a lot of pluses and minuses this weekend.
Last one on the list, number 1 Quinnipiac is at number 8 Cornell at Rink on Saturday. On Tuesday night, Quinnipiac had a 9-0 win over Princeton. Both teams have been goaltending by committee, a committee of 2 at Quinnipiac, which has been spectacular and more average among the 3 goaltenders at Cornell. It seems like this is a weekend where Quinnipiac has the opportunity either to cement themselves as the top team in the nation or to make all the doubters say, hey, I was right, and maybe not get back to number 1 ever again through this season. There's a lot on the line for people like that. But in the ECAC, this is really a matchup of what are probably the 2 best teams in the league.
Arguably, I would agree with you, Ed. I think that these are the 2 best ECAC teams. And, you know, they'll play twice this year, this Saturday, and then I believe it's the last weekend of the year. Quinnipiac will face both Cornell and Colgate again. And, that, for one thing, I don't think that Quinnipiac can look to the Saturday game this week thinking that they have Cornell on Saturday. They have to take care of Colgate first. But when I look at the tests ahead, and there are still some tests, and Quinnipiac will play Sacred Heart in the Connecticut Ice Tournament. That's the last weekend of January. And then, you get past them, or whomever you play the next night is going to be the UConn or Yale. And there's going to be some tests involved there. But there aren't a ton. There aren't a bunch of games that you sit there and say, oh, these are really tough games. There's another game for Harvard against Quinnipiac. But when I look at this schedule and I look at how strong this defense has been for Quinnipiac, this goaltending duo, which really is now becoming a kind of a solo show for Yanni Peretz, I look at everything that's in front of Quinnipiac and think they can win out. They can leave this regular season with 1 loss. That's how good this team is. They are not up there in the pairwise right now. And that's something that is kind of a penalty of being in the ECAC. But if they get to the end of the season with only 1 loss, or maybe you could even say 2 losses, you get there with 26, 27 wins and just 1 loss. you're going to be one of the top 2, maybe top 3 teams. You'll be a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, but you have to take care of business. It's making sure you do what you're supposed to do every night, but then it's these games, 2 against Cornell, 1 more against Harvard. You might throw in 1 against UConn, and even Sacred Heart can be a challenge. Those games right now are the ones that you have to circle on your schedule and realize these are the tough ones, but we have to take care of business every other night.
Yeah, and Colgate is no slouch. Colgate is a good enough team that if Quinnipiac is not careful, that the Raiders could end up with an upset. I think the thing that's compelling to me in this matchup is that Cornell has come off that sweep out at North Dakota. And that shows me that they can play with anybody and they can beat anybody. And Mike Schaefer's a smart enough coach that he's going to have a game plan for Quinnipiac ready.
Yeah, 3 in a row for them. I think that this is the true test for both of these teams. If you're Cornell, you're trying to make a case for why you can bump into the, top 5 of the country in the poll, top 10 in the PairWise. What will get you there? A win over Quinnipiac right now. You win this game. It's a single game, and they have a Friday night game as well. But you win those 2 games, and you extend your winning streak to 5 games. If you're Mike Schaefer, you're going to be sitting there on Monday saying, "Boy, we're doing pretty well, and we're in really good position."
I want to make one comment right here at the end, since we talked about PairWise. In our Monday, actually Tuesday morning, that's why they call it that, TMQ, Tuesday morning quarterback. Dan Rubin and I got into a little bit of a discussion about the PairWise, and I made the comment that I was taken to task on, that the PairWise is arbitrary. And here's what I mean by that. Yeah, it's very concrete in the numbers, but the way the numbers are chosen is not based on anything intrinsic to the game of hockey. There are some kind of fudge numbers. The RPI is made up of percentages of your winning percentage and your opponents and your opponent's opponents. Those are kind of arbitrary numbers that have changed over the years. The quality wins bonus, that is something that's kind of put in as a fudge factor. It has nothing to do with what happens on the ice. And the 55-45 split, if you win in overtime, again, kind of an arbitrary number. Those numbers, you shift those a little bit, the PairWise looks a little bit different. If you make it 30% for your winning percentage instead of 25, all of a sudden Quinnipiac, instead of sitting at number 5, is probably at 2 or 3. Those are the things that are in there. People have to understand there's no concrete thing. People will throw back, strength of schedule. They have a weak schedule. I took a look at the number 1 schedule in college hockey, which was Minnesota Duluth, and Quinnipiac at number 36. There's about a 14% difference in those numbers. Again, if you shift them around, it makes a difference. But 14% is the difference of 3 or 4 games against the bottom of your league. If you win those, you've done what you're supposed to do. Too much is put on that to say, that's a terrible team. They play a weak schedule. These numbers are all very close from weakest to strongest. From number 1 to number 59, there's about a 24% difference. It's not like somebody has a schedule that's 10 times harder than everybody else. So yeah, these numbers, they're applied in a concrete and specific manner, but the way they're come up with, they've been fudged, they've been massaged, they've been twisted, they've been stretched year after year to get the results that people want when the results don't happen the way they wanted them to happen. So yes, it's arbitrary, but everybody knows the arbitrary numbers in a concrete way. I hope I explained that well, Jim. Go ahead and toss in what you'd like.
Well, a computer does spit out the numbers at the end of the day. So people think it's a computer ranking the PairWise. And yes, you need a computer to do the math. I wouldn't want to sit there with pad and paper and do all the math. So yes, it feels like a computer ranking, but it's a computer ranking that in college hockey sense, and I have to be careful with the term I use, but it's not a good comparison. It's not the perfect comparison, but it's often gerrymandered.
Yes.
We have conference commissioners and conference coaches that didn't like the results in X year, pushed and swayed and influenced to make sure that the percentages of the PairWise, percentages of the RPI changed. And then we got the quality win bonus, and then we got the home road bonus, all of these things that have been added to the PairWise over time. And then we've taken away things. We took away the last 20 game criteria, which became the last 16 game criteria. And people said, oh, well, you have 2 Hockey East teams or 2 WCHA teams, or, back when the WCHA was the strong league, that didn't play the strongest schedules. They didn't play tough schedules down the stretch, and they did really well in the end. And we had a tough schedule, and that's why we have to take I don't love the word gerrymandering because it feels like a very politically loaded term, but that is what we have done to the PairWise over time to make it so that the people who have the loudest voices get their teams into the tournament.
Yep, I agree. It's funny, since USCHO was the first to publish a PairWise, that we would criticize it. But hey, we're just reporting on what's happening, and maybe it's time to start with a clean sheet. It's definitely not a clean sheet, because if you look at the code that we used to generate it, you can see all the different times things have been changed. We didn't even mention teams under consideration and the TUC cliff and teams being added to the teams under consideration when they win their league, and then that being taken out. All this stuff has happened over the last 15 years to massage and maneuver and gerrymander. And I think that's the right term, Jim. And with that, so as not to elevate our blood pressure any further, we're going to wrap it up here for this week's episode, which has been brought to you by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Membership required. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Game of the Week podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.